Is the new Aukus pact an alliance maker or a conflict creator? A furious French president recalls its ambassadors to the US and Australia. Is this just a short-term diplomatic spat, or could it signal the start of a long-lasting feud? I'm Adej Anayandar, and today's newsmaker is the fallout from the Aukus alliance. In 2016, Australia and France signed a multi-billion-dollar defense deal. The French dubbed it the contract of the century, and it was supposed to be the start of a decades-long happy marriage. Just have a listen to then French President François Hollande's lavishing praise on his new partners in Canberra for choosing French contractor DCNS to build Australia's future fleet of submarines.
It is Australia that picked us, and we owe it a loss. As a century ago, Australians came over to defend us. They came from afar, giving for some their life to free us. So today, 100 years later, it is once more Australia that is entrusting us in giving us this cooperation, this partnership for the next 50 years. So today I say, thank you DCNS for this success, thank you to the French defense industry for this technological quality, thank you to French team to secure this wonderful contract, and thank you, Australia, to entrust us. Thank you.
Merci, l'industrie de défense.
Well, fast forward 5 years, and that relationship has ruptured. And it all comes down to a new security deal between Australia, the UK, and the United States. France feels betrayed after seeing its agreement with Australia cast aside like scrap metal, and it's finding it hard to hide its fury.
I think this has been a huge mistake, a very, very bad handling of a partnership, because it was not a contract, it was a partnership. A trust partnership that's supposed to be based on trust, mutual understanding, and also a partnership based, on sincerity.
Now, this new deal between Australia, the UK, and the United States, known as the Aukus Alliance, is essentially a joint defense agreement aimed at challenging Chinese dominance in the Indo-Pacific. But France, which was excluded, may not be the only country to feel aggrieved by this agreement. While the new pact has brought Canberra, London, and Washington closer together, it seems to have pushed once friendly nations further away. The EU's top diplomat, Jacques Reland, says Brussels wasn't informed of the deal in advance, but the EU hasn't reacted with as much anger as France. With the tensions running high, Paris canceled a high-profile defense meeting with the UK and, in an historic move, recalled its ambassadors to both the United States and Australia. But Prime Minister Scott Morrison has remained defiant, declaring his country's national interests will always come first.
So I understand their disappointment, but at the same time, Australia, like any sovereign nation, must always take decisions that are in our sovereign national defence interests. And that's what we've done on this circumstance.
Scott Morrison there, standing by the Aukus alliance. But is he right to do so? And is France's anger at the new pact justified? To discuss this, I'm now joined from London by Elisabeth Braw, a senior fellow over at the American Enterprise Institute. Jacques Reland is in Saint-Malo in France. He's a senior research fellow over at the Global Policy Institute. And from Washington, D.C. is Des Roches, a professor at the National Defense University. Welcome to all of you. It's good to have you on the show. Jacques, let me start with you. I mean, albeit it's worth billions of dollars, but it's more than just a commercial deal. I mean, this was sort of the centerpiece of France's project in the Indo-Pacific.
Indeed, it was part of an alliance which France wanted to develop, France and the European Union with Australia, Japan and India, in order to try to develop a third way, a new approach in dealing with China and the increasing aggressive posture of China. But the most important thing is the way in which this announcement was made. In diplomacy, style or is form is as important as content. And the way it was announced, the way this deal was sewn up between the Brits and the Australians and the US was done in the back of the French without prior knowledge at all, and it was considered as insulting by the French authorities. They could not understand why they had not been forewarned, why it was announced just like that, and they thought that really it was an insult to France. And at the same time, when you analyze it, you realize that yes, it is a slap in the face of France. It's a way for the Americans to say, don't play in our backyard. You don't try to punch above your weight. We are the ones who decide in this area, and just uh, just accept that you're a minor player and that we are going to call the shots.
David, let me turn to you. Jacques said, in diplomacy, style is perhaps just as important as content. That being said, when you look at it from a French perspective, I mean, there was surely an element of surprise when you look at sort of the brutality and the lack of consultation. One wonders what type of message the United States wanted to send here.
Well, I don't think the United States was sending a message. Look, the client here was Australia. It was Australia's role to notify its previous vendor that the contract was being terminated, and it would be the United States stepping in on that. So I agree. It's a slap in the face, and you left off the other thing, which is there are a lot of people in France who are going to lose their job over this. I mean, France does not have enough domestic requirements for submarines to sustain the unionized, well-paid manufacturing base that these submarines would have provided. And these guys are going to lose their jobs, 8 months out from a presidential election. So this is also politically problematic. But again, the notification was an Australian responsibility, not an American one. I think that we probably took our lead from that. And I think that, the impetus for this whole thing didn't come from the United States, contrary to what people think in university faculty lounges. We actually tend to put the brakes on our partners' weapons purchasing decisions. This was an Australian decision. That the French contract would not fulfill their needs, would cost too much, was approaching the cost point where nuclear submarines would be affordable. And given the evolution of the Chinese threat in the last 5 years, that seemed to make sense for the Australians. So we were kind of brought along on those coattails.
I'm going to pick up on that topic in just 1 second, but I want to turn to Elisabeth and bring her in the conversation. I mean, when you look at how France conducts or pursues its own policy and deals, perhaps it could be described as not the most polite manner. I mean, now that it's on the other side, I mean, should it come as much of a surprise?
Well, I think it's fair to say there's no love lost for France among its allies, and it has been really quite remarkable to see how little sympathy has been expressed, little, if any, sympathy has been expressed for it among its fellow EU member states. And I think it's because they feel that France uses its elbows quite freely vis-a-vis them when it comes to areas where France is pursuing something at their expense, and that can, for example, include weapon or military equipment deals with other countries. But so I think if France had more political capital, these other countries would come to its defense now and stand up for it. But that's not happening, and it's unfortunate because all of this will weaken the European Union, which is already happening because France has said it's not keen to pursue the free trade deal with Australia. So all of this is extremely unfortunate. But at the end of the day, this is about the Chinese threats and the Australians deciding that what they needed to better defend themselves are nuclear-powered submarines as opposed to diesel-powered submarines.
We'll get to the Chinese threat in just a bit, but Jacques, I saw you sort of smirk there and also shake your head.
By the intervention of the two other people here, saying that it's about job losses for the French well-paid, well-subsidized military industry. It makes me laugh because we know that America only exports really outside the services, the GAFA, is weapons. And there again, and we know the importance of the military-industrial lobby in America. We did not like the idea of the French supplying submarines. They want to supply their own weapons everywhere, even in other European countries. The Americans don't want the development of a European defense industry. Each time, maybe it dates back to 2003 when Condoleezza Rice said that we have to punish the French for their stance on Iraq, and the person in the UK here saying that nobody likes the French, and that's why nobody feels sorry for them. I'm sorry, this basically aggression, this intimidation of France is also an intimidation towards the European Union. And contrary to what the other people say, it has upset some European countries, especially the Germans, who don't want this confrontational attitude with Germany with China to be done, to be enacted. They're trying. Europe would like to, don't forget that for Germany, China is a very important customer. The Chinese Volkswagen sells more cars in China than the whole German market put together. So it's we don't want. It seems to us that maybe the Americans are intent on a repeat of 2003 during the war, before the war against Iraq, and want to divide Europe. They don't want Europe to develop a united strategy toward China, because on Thursday, Ursula von der Leyen outlined the idea of a European strategy in that region, which was spearheaded by the French, it's true, but which had the backing also of Germany, who don't want to have today a global war on China like we had a global war on terrorism in 2003.
Okay, I want to sort of get the European perspective, but David, I want to squeeze you because you want to have a counter to that.
No, it's just it's laughable to suppose that Joe Biden is carrying Condoleezza Rice's water, that he's carrying on an argument that she made in 2003. Look, I don't want to, the French are valued allies and we enjoy working with them, but I just want your listeners to notice that the little shift that just happened, where it went from France considerations to broadening those into European-wide considerations. This is entirely in keeping with the French political approach to the world, which under the Fifth Republic, I think could be described in the 22nd shorthand is a very large fish searching for a pond in which it is the largest fish. But again, America's largest export are passenger aircraft. Our second largest export are computers and iPhones. Arms are pretty far down the list, and we don't make these decisions on economic basis because our bureaucracy is bifurcated. And on all my time in the Pentagon, I never said we have to do this because it brings jobs to America. That was never a consideration, and we deny more requests than we approve.
But David, I think you would agree that the American military complex, industrial complex, sort of drives the foreign policy in many regards when it comes to the United States. Elisabeth, let me turn to you. It was a slap in the face of France, and I know that sort of Jacques wanted to bring in the European perspective on how damaging was this to Europe, or not as much as it to France?
Well, so it's interesting that we are already at this point where we're saying it's damaging to the European Union. Primarily, it's damaging to France, but France is now trying to, I think, position it as damaging to the European Union. But I think that the biggest damage to the European Union is that France is putting the brakes on the free trade deal between the EU and Australia, which it wouldn't have to do, but it's doing so, I think, out of anger. I think that the fundamental problem in the European Union is that most member states, especially since the UK left, have felt that Germany and France are too powerful, that they introduce concepts, ideas, initiatives that are then presented as European or as EU-wide initiatives, and that may or may not benefit the other member states, especially the smaller ones, and especially the ones in Central and Eastern Europe who have absolutely no love lost for France. And I think that is the main EU cohesion is the main victim of this deal, because France is taking out its anger vis-à-vis the UK and Australia somehow on the EU by using the EU to instrumentalize this anger, and it's extremely unfortunate, because I think we all agree that free trade is something to be saluted and should be advanced between different countries and between the EU and different other countries in the world.
Jacques, let me ask you, I mean, it's no secret that the submarine deal between France and Australia was sort of running into difficulties. In fact, Le Figaro had actually published an article saying that Australia was actively looking for a plan B at some point. Why didn't Paris pick up on this?
Maybe there were rumors that there were problems. There's always problems in delivering arms contract, like the Brits know very well with the frigates they're trying to sell to Australia, and which are 2 years late and overcost. There's always problems, and there were delays, but Australia never said that it was a major problem. On the 30th of August, the Minister of Defense and the Minister of Foreign Affairs of France met their Australian counterparts and published a communiqué that saying that everything was hunky-dory. We're working towards a common partnership in that part of the world, and the submarine deal is part of it. And less than 2 weeks later, they announced that they pull out. So maybe there were criticism, but there's always criticism when there is a big industry or developments like that. But there was no sign. There was real strong duplicity. And the Australians only fought the French government, only communicated with the French 1 hour before announcing that deal.
Okay,
So,
Jacques, let me ask you, I mean, after seeing this, I mean, whether it's the nature of the relationship, I mean, do they feel that they have to reevaluate the alliance? I mean, or does it feel that America has perhaps double standards here?
Absolutely. But also, it was, at the moment, there's a big debate in Europe, and not only in France, contrary to what Elisabeth says. There's about the future evolution of the European Union, the strategic and military interest of Europe. Does it have, it would have to play for itself. We've seen with after Afghanistan, the withdrawal of America, that America doesn't consult their allies. Maybe the America have given up on some countries. They've given up on the Middle East. The Middle East for us is very important because it's very close to the European Union, and it has an impact on migrations in the area. So maybe we have to develop greater sovereignty in that field. And we also have to, there's a strategic review at the moment to try to see how NATO can involve. A couple of years ago, Macron said that NATO was brand dead. At the moment, they're talking about what should be, how could we rebalance our relations and our responsibilities within NATO, and it's meant to be discussed, and the discussions are meant to lead to some kind of agreement at the next NATO summit in the spring in Madrid. So there are talks that, and this announcement comes right in the middle at the time where Europe is trying to develop its own foreign policy, which is not an American policy. It's not like global Britain, which means actually American Britain. The future of Europe is not necessarily American Europe, as Elisabeth and I forgot your first name, seem to imply. Maybe there is room for European increased sovereignty and increased defense capacity.
David, do you think there is a sort of a hierarchy amongst allies? I mean, perhaps maybe Anglo-Saxons are sort of higher on that list, or because that's what I'm sort of picking up from what Jacques is saying, perhaps.
Well, it's not based on language or ethnicity. I mean, my ancestors are actually Melinois. They're from the town where Jacques is speaking from, but it's based on things like the ability to preserve confidential information codes, to not allow information and co-production to migrate. So, for example, we have co-production agreements with the Japanese, who are not Anglo-Saxon, for the production of F-15 fighters, which is an extremely sensitive technology that we have not allowed to be produced in any other country. So it's not necessarily Anglo-Saxon. What many Europeans have a problem with is the cryptological and intelligence sharing agreement called Five Eyes. That's the United States, Canada, Britain, Australia, and New Zealand. Which is a higher level of cryptology, but that dates back again to trust network, although occasionally ruptured because there were so many Russians in the British intelligence in the 40s and 50s. That dates back to World War II. And again, it's a series of arrangements and a great track record. But I've got to point out, I mean, I've served alongside French forces. There's not a rupture at the tactical level. This is generally at the national level. And I must disagree that a large part of this is, I think, posturing in advance of the election. There are a lot of workers who are going to be put out of work for this. And President Macron, who in some polls is in a statistical heat with Le Pen, for crying out loud, has got to throw crockery around and show he is angry, because he doesn't have a lot of other options at this point.
Could we say that maybe also Joe Biden has electoral concern? Maybe he wants to show that he's tough, that he's following in Trump footsteps ahead of the midterm elections. That could be maybe a point of view. I'm not saying that it is the case, but you seem to imply that it's sort of a posture in front of, as a result of the presidential election. I don't agree with you, because most French politicians of all camps share the anger, the sense of humiliation that France has just been subjected to.
I agree with you. So when you see a parade, and everybody's marching in the parade, the thing to do is get yourself in front of the parade and look like you're directing it rather than be left behind. Look, in America, this story is only of interest to people who follow foreign affairs, and that's a very, very small group. So it's not a national interest here, but it will be a national issue in France.
I don't have a lot of time left, but Elisabeth, I want to turn to you. I mean, I want to talk about sort of a partner in this that's an important partner that we really haven't talked about that much, London. I mean, for this, how much of it is this trying to find a new place on the international stage post-Brexit with this deal?
Well, it's huge because it's, well, first of all, it comes very soon after the Afghanistan withdrawal, where the UK very much disagreed with the US and tried to broker some sort of agreement where a certain number of forces would stay longer than what the Americans had decided. That wasn't successful in the end. But also the UK has something called the Global Britain initiative or policy, however you want to label it. Anyway, Global Britain. It hasn't really been clear what Global Britain is about, except it's not about the EU. And so this is an opportunity for the UK to show that it counts in the world, that it can sign major deals with other countries. This time it was in the area of defense, but it could equally be in other areas. So it's hugely important to the UK. And then if I may add one thing about the French defense industry, countries, including the UK and smaller countries such as Sweden that are have a big defense industry, for years have been watching how French politicians essentially act as the salesmen for French defense companies, and they are pretty tough and use not very nice methods to win deals for France. And I think as a result of that, not many countries feel much pity for France in this situation.
Unlike other countries where you sell weapons, who all act absolutely in a pristine and elegant and very civil manner, I suppose.
David, I want to turn to you. In the coming days, the French president will be having a conversation with Joe Biden. What do you think is going to be said? What should be said? How does Washington sort of diffuse the current tensions?
Well, I think what Washington will say is pride. It's like the speech that Marcellus Wallace gives to Bruce Willis in Pulp Fiction. Look, pride is damaged, pride is injured here. But sometimes if you make a mistake out of pride or out of anger, you will run counter to your own national interests. Look at your national security interests, see where they lie. Our countries, the United States would not be independent without French aid. We have a long history of collaboration and cooperation. For whatever reason, the disagreements, which are aberrations, but they tend to resonate more in the public memory. Look at the basics of the relationship and build off of that. I'm not sure how successful that message will be, but I think that's the message that will be made.
Jacques, I'm going to give you the last word. We have about 30 seconds left. Is that going to be enough?
I suppose. What is the question? But the question is, what do you want me to summarize? I think that, yes, this announcement was very significant because for me, it's the forerunner of the debate which is going to concern the whole Western world and also Europe. Are you with the Americans or not? And the American view, America first, is still there, and we are still in this approach that it's not international law that counts, it's not conciliation that counts, it's might is right. That's always been the American approach, and this announcement, this new announcement shows it, and that they are going to remain. They are the top unsure in the world, and they don't want anyone to challenge or undermine it.
Elisabeth Braw, Jacques Reland, and Des Roches, thank you very much for joining us here on The Newsmakers. Thanks for watching. See you next time.